Galaxy had laughed for 300 years. They called humans the kind Deathworlders, a predator species that apologized for its own strength, choosing diplomacy over conquest. They saw soft words and mistook them for fear. Then came the quiet day. Across 1,000 star systems, every human ambassador stood, bowed politely, and walked away mid-sentence. Embassies went dark. Trade routes emptied. The Council's panicked hails meant only a looping broadcast. Humanity is consulting its conscience. The laughing stopped. Humanity had been the galaxy's gentle giant, a predator race that chose peace. For 3 centuries they smiled through the mockery. Then in a single moment they stopped. The recall was not an act of retreat but a warning. And the galaxy finally had to ask, what happens when a Deathworlder's patience runs out? To understand the quiet day, you have to rewind 3 centuries. Humanity's first contact was not a war story. It was a diplomatic mission of unprecedented scale. Earth, a high-gravity death world that birthed a species of apex predators, emerged onto the galactic stage and immediately extended a hand instead of a fist. The Galactic Council, a sprawling bureaucracy of 17 sentient species, had seen new races rise before. They expected territorial aggression, a scramble for resources, the usual dance of dominance. What they got was the exact opposite. Humans arrived with open trade agreements, medical technologies derived from their own brutal evolutionary biology, and a disarming humility that confused the galaxy. They called themselves stewards, not conquerors. They offered to mediate ancient interstellar feuds. They apologized when their ships accidentally drifted too close to sovereign space. To the Council, this was unprecedented and deeply suspicious. The Velnari, a reptilian empire that dominated the Outer Arm, were the first to coin the phrase. During a session on resource allocation, the Velnari ambassador sneered at the human delegation and said, "Look at the kind Deathworlders, pretending they're not one provocation away from eating us all." The council chamber erupted in condescending laughter. The human ambassador, a woman named Sarah Chen, simply smiled and adjusted her trade proposal by 0.1% in the Velnari's favor. The insult became a nickname. It stuck. Over the decades, humanity leaned into the role. They became the galaxy's mediators, its healers, its most reliable allies. But the jabs never stopped. At the annual Galactic Summit on Korriban 9, delegates would mock humanity's home world. "Just visiting Earth's gravity would snap my spine," a Draken diplomat once joked to applause. "How cute that they think peace is strength." The humans in the room would nod along, their faces unreadable. It was almost a ritual. The council would taunt, and the humans would absorb it, smile, and offer another gift. Behind closed doors, however, the human ambassadors kept meticulous records, not just of insults but of fleet movements, trade route vulnerabilities, and military posturing. In the great data vaults beneath the council's capital city, human analysts fed petabytes of diplomatic chatter into predictive models. They were mapping not just the politics, but the psychology of every species. They learned that the Velnari feared most the thing they mocked loudest, a Deathworlder unbound. And they learned that the Council's peace was held together by nothing more than the assumption that humanity would never fight back. The turning point arrived not with a bang, but with a silent, simultaneous order. It came after 17 years of escalating border violations by the Velnari into human-protected sectors. After the massacre of a human colony on Seti Prime, where 3,000 civilians died, the Council tabled a resolution of formal condemnation. The Velnari vetoed it and the chamber applauded. The human ambassador stood to speak, and for the first time she stayed silent. She simply walked out. And within the hour, across 1,000 embassies, every single human diplomat did the same. The kind Deathworlders had stopped smiling, and the galaxy had no idea what was about to come next. The recall was not a negotiation tactic. It was a countdown. Within 48 hours of the first ambassador walking out, the Galactic Council's emergency session descended into chaos. The Velnari delegation, sensing a power vacuum, immediately pushed for sanctions against humanity. "They've abandoned their duties," the Velnari Prime Minister hissed. "Let them go. The kind Deathworlders are having a tantrum." But the translators noticed a tremor beneath the aggression. the Velnari were not confident. They were terrified, and they had good reason to be. What the Council failed to grasp was that humanity's diplomatic corps was not running. They were evacuating. In every embassy before the lights went dark, human intelligence officers purged their secure servers. Trade agreements, resource maps, medical supply chains, every gift humanity had ever given, all of it came with backdoors. The generous trade deals had embedded kill switches that would cripple economies. The medical technologies relied on synthesized compounds only humans could produce, and the defensive grids they had installed across Council worlds, as a gesture of goodwill, were now ghost networks awaiting a single activation code. The Velnari Empire learned this the hard way 3 days later. A Velnari battlecruiser, patrolling the buffer zone near Seti Prime, detected an anomaly. Human civilian freighters, thousands of them, had formed a convoy. Not fleeing, not hiding, but holding position just outside Velnari sensor range. The captain demanded surrender codes. The humans responded with a simple message: "We are no longer bound by diplomatic protocols. Withdraw all military assets from the neutral zone within 1 standard hour." The Velnari laughed. They sent a warning shot. The human freighters did not move. Instead, they began jettisoning cargo containers. Those containers were not filled with goods. They were filled with automated kinetic launch platforms, the kind you drop into a gravity well to bombard a planet from its own orbit. The Velnari battlecruiser broadcast a distress signal. It went unanswered. The humans had already jammed every frequency. The captain stared at his tactical screen as the freighters vanished into slip space, leaving behind a silent, orbiting minefield that would make the system impassable for decades. It was not an attack. It was a statement. Back on the Council capital world, the alien delegates were starting to realize the scale of their miscalculation. The human ambassadors had been the galaxy's foremost keepers of secrets. For 3 centuries, they had sat in every closed-door briefing, every military strategy session, every budget hearing. They knew the exact location of the Velnari fleet yards, the Draken wormhole generators, the Tellaris singularity bombs. And now, their silence was the most terrifying weapon of all. But the biggest shock came when the Council attempted to reach the human homeworld directly. The Earth they had mocked as a lethal backwater of crushing gravity and hostile wildlife, the planet that should have been a curiosity on the galactic fringe, was no longer answering. The subspace relays went dead. The quantum entanglement communicators returned only static. The Council's Science Division reported an impossible reading. A Dyson-scale energy field had been activated around the entire Sol system, a shield that bent the fabric of spacetime itself. It was technology that should not have existed. The kind Deathworlders had not just withdrawn. They had sealed themselves behind a wall that no known weapon could breach. And then the true purpose of the quiet day became clear. It was not about protecting humanity. It was about protecting the galaxy from what humanity was about to become. The ambassadors had not fled. They had been recalled to witness the unmuzzling. Deep within the Sol system, in shipyards hidden inside the corona of the sun, massive warships were stirring. Warships built in secret over 2 centuries. Warships that had never appeared on any registry. Warships with hulls carved from the bones of a species that had once hunted its own kind on a planet that killed 90% of everything that walked on its surface. The kind Deathworlders were going back to their roots, and the galaxy was about to learn that kindness had been the only thing standing between them and annihilation. The Velnari were the first to understand what true silence from a Deathworlder meant. Within a week of the Sol Shield's activation, the Velnari homeworld suffered a cascade of failures. Their communication relays, the ones donated by humanity 50 years earlier as a gift of goodwill, began emitting a low-frequency pulse that scrambled neural implants across every Velnari colony. Millions of their citizens collapsed in seizures. Their economy, built on the backbone of human-designed logistics algorithms, froze. The Velnari Prime Minister, once the loudest voice mocking the kind Deathworlders, now stood in a darkened war chamber, staring at a holographic map where 23 star systems blinked red. He whispered a single word: trapped. But humanity's quiet withdrawal was not targeted solely at the Velnari. Every major power on the Council felt the tremors. The Draken wormhole generators, which humanity had helped calibrate and maintain, abruptly reversed polarity. 3 of their key trade corridors collapsed into singularities, isolating their fringe territories. The Tellaris, a species of energy-based intelligences, found their containment grids, designed by human engineers, emitting harmonics that literally dissolved their consciousness. The entire quadrant began to unravel. Star systems that had been connected for millennia suddenly went dark, and from behind the impenetrable shield around Saul, humanity watched in absolute silence. The Council convened an emergency summit, this time without the usual laughter. The Velnari ambassador, a younger replacement for the one who had coined the infamous nickname, stood before the assembly and read a prepared statement. "We have underestimated their patience as weakness. We have failed to ask the essential question." His voice cracked. "What does a predator do with all that quiet time?" The chamber filled with uncomfortable murmurs. The answer was unfolding in real time. A week later, a single human probe exited the Sol shield. It was not a warship. It was a simple, unarmed satellite broadcasting on an ancient radio frequency. The transmission contained one file, a 15-hour documentary of humanity's history, but not the sanitized version from the diplomatic archives. This was the raw truth, footage from Earth's pre-spaceflight era. World wars, nuclear mushroom clouds, trenches filled with the dead, gas chambers, genocides. Then it showed the genetic records. Humans were not just apex predators. They were the sole surviving hominid species because they had outcompeted or outright eliminated every other branch of their evolutionary tree. The documentary ended with a title card: "We chose to be kind. That choice is now revoked." The psychological impact on the Council was immediate and devastating. For 3 centuries, they had mistaken restraint for docility. They had never asked why a creature forged in Earth's kiln of gravity, radiation, and competition would choose to sheath its claws. Now they understood. The claws had only been retracted, never removed. The documentary's final sequence showed a map of the galaxy with every Council world marked in red. A voiceover, calm and measured, delivered the ultimatum: humanity is consulting its conscience. This process will take 30 standard days. At the end of that time, we will announce our decision. You may wish to prepare. The panic was instantaneous. Entire planetary populations mobilized in fear. The Council's military strategists ran simulations, and the results were catastrophic. Against a fully unshackled human war machine, their combined fleets would last approximately 11 minutes. But that was not the worst revelation. A week later, a Velnari intelligence operative managed to intercept a signal from within the Sol shield. It was a fragment, heavily encrypted, but what they decoded made the temperature in the room drop. The signal showed that humanity had not built new warships. They had been building a weapon, not a fleet, but a single device buried deep inside Jupiter's core, a gravity lance capable of detonating any star in the galaxy from any distance. The ambassador recall had been necessary not because of a coup, but because humanity needed all its diplomats home to serve as a collective conscience for the trial ahead. The consultation was a literal court, and the defendants were the 17 species of the Galactic Council. The sentence would be delivered at the end of 30 days, and the galaxy, for the first time in 3 centuries, understood what it felt like to be prey. On the 30th day, the Sol shield flickered and vanished. Every sensor in the galaxy turned toward that single point, and what they saw made civilizations tremble. The human fleet did not emerge. Instead, a single transmission beamed directly to the council chamber. It was a live feed from a courtroom. Not a human courtroom, but something far older. The chamber was carved from obsidian and lit by the cold light of a neutron star. Seated behind a massive obsidian bench were 7 humans, their faces calm, their eyes utterly devoid of mercy. They were the ambassadors who had walked out on the quiet day, and they had been appointed as judges. The Velnari delegation, the Draken, the Tellaris, every species that had mocked humanity for 3 centuries, now stood in the dock. Not physically, the transmission was a legal summons. Humanity had spent the 30 days not building weapons but assembling a case. The documentary they had broadcast was the prosecution's opening statement. Now came the verdict. Sarah Chen, the ambassador who had first endured the kind Deathworlders' insult, rose and spoke in flawless Velnari, then Draken, then Telaris, then the tongues of every species present. She read a single sentence. For 300 years you mistook our patience for permission. That misunderstanding ends today. The verdict was not annihilation. It was not the firing of the gravity lance. Humanity revealed that the weapon beneath Jupiter was never meant as a tool of genocide. It was a failsafe, a means to collapse the entire local star cluster if humanity was ever faced with extinction by external aggression. They called it the last mercy because it would end suffering instantly, without the drawn-out horror of interstellar war. The 30-day consultation had been about whether to activate it preemptively or to give the galaxy one final chance. The ambassadors, now judges, explained that humanity's greatest trauma was not its violent past, but the shame of it. They had spent millennia learning to control the predator within, and the peace they offered the stars was the hardest thing they had ever done. The mockery, the insults, the colonial massacres, they had swallowed all of it, believing that maturity meant absorbing pain without lashing out. But the Seti Prime massacre broke that faith. The Council's refusal to condemn it shattered it completely. So humanity decided to let the galaxy see the monster, not to unleash it but to place it in the room. And now, with every major civilization's military systems inexplicably offline, and their leaders watching from their own command bunkers, humanity delivered its terms. The Galactic Council would be dissolved and replaced by a new compact, led by a human council of overseers. The Velnari would stand trial for war crimes. All client species under imperial rule would be granted immediate sovereignty. And no species would ever again confuse kindness with weakness, because the gravity lance would remain not as a threat, but as a reminder that humanity had chosen mercy when it could have chosen fire. The transmission ended, and the galactic communication networks, restored in an instant, flooded with a single image. The planet Earth, serene and blue, ringed by the ships that had never existed, their hulls bearing the emblem of a fist unclenching into an open palm. The quiet day was over. And the galaxy, chastened and terrified, released a collective breath it hadn't realized it was holding. But the quiet day left a mark that would never fully fade. Across every capital world, the laughter was gone. In its place was something unfamiliar, the weight of understanding. For 3 centuries, the galaxy had treated humanity like a well-trained beast, assuming the leash would hold forever. They never asked what would happen if the leash was simply set down, not broken, but voluntarily discarded. In the aftermath, historians across 17 species began rewriting their own first contact narratives, searching for the moment the misunderstanding took root. They found it buried in a Velnari diplomatic log from the first summit. The humans smiled even as we insulted their home. Weakness or strategy? The note had been dismissed. Now it read like a prophecy. Humanity returned to the galactic stage, not as conquerors, but as stewards with a permanent reminder. The gravity lance, silent and suspended in the core of Jupiter, a monument to what almost was. The new compact did not erase the old council's sins. It built a system where the powerful were watched by those who had once been mocked, and the ambassadors who had walked out came back wearing the emblem of an open hand, but everyone now knew it could close in an instant. The lesson of the quiet day is not about a hidden weapon or a secret fleet. It is about the cost of underestimating those who choose peace. It forces a question that echoes into every boardroom, every diplomatic chamber, every human heart. How long can you be kind before kindness becomes permission? And what happens when you finally say no? Thank you for joining us on this journey into one of the most transformative moments in galactic history. If this story challenged your assumptions about power and patience, please press like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel. We release deep dive documentaries every week, covering the untold events that shaped the universe. Drop a comment below. Do you believe humanity's restraint was genuine, or was it always a mask? We read every single one. Until next time, keep questioning the silence.